China retaliates against new trade tariffs imposed by the United States. How could this growing trade war affect the global economy? Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. Beijing says it's had no choice but to retaliate against new US tariffs on its exports. The United States announced some $200 billion worth of imports from China will be taxed at 10% starting next week, and that's set to go up to 25% in January if there's no resolution to this trade war. Washington has already threatened more tariffs in response to Beijing's retaliatory action. For the latest back and forth between Beijing and Washington, I'm joined by CGTN's Owen Fairclough in our newsroom. Owen, thanks for joining us. How has the announcement of these new tariffs, a lot of Chinese goods there, received in China itself?
Well, Nathan, Beijing had warned the United States it would retaliate if it went through with those tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports into the United States. As you mentioned there, the Chinese retaliated very swiftly, announcing they would put duties of their own on $60 billion worth of US imports. They've arguably been a little bit more strategic, perhaps, on what they're doing. And I say that because one of the products that the Chinese are taxing is liquefied natural gas. The US wants to be a world leader in exports of this stuff. It's got so much of it. It warned the retaliation would be swift, and China's foreign ministry wasted no time in explaining its position. Let's hear from China's foreign ministry.
Here I want to reiterate that in response to the action taken by the U.S. side, China has to take necessary countermeasures to defend its own legitimate rights and interests and safeguard the global order of free trade. The U.S. action has brought new uncertainties to the trade negotiations between the two sides. Previously, we expressed our stance on China-U.S. trade issues many times, and I think it has already been made clear for everybody.
So yeah, uncertainties there in those negotiations. Nathan, you'll remember, of course, that just days ago, the US had been talking about potentially bringing China back to the table. And of course, we saw through the summer when this trade war really started to escalate, back-channel discussions trying to bring these two sides around the table. But China's indicating there that really for the time being, those discussions are no-go.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that. You know, the US had invited the Chinese to a new round of talks on trade at the end of last week before we got this tariff announcement. What's the outlook now in light of those tariffs? Because in the end, they've got to talk, right?
You would think so. We just get such mixed messages, don't we? Certainly from the Trump administration about this. President Trump was talking about these tariffs a little earlier this Tuesday. We know that Trump wants to try and force China into changing what he calls unfair trade practices. That's the Chinese allegedly undercutting US producers, forcing trade partners to give up their trade secrets. He wants to try and change all that through this leverage of tariffs. Let's hear from President Trump.
Taking advantage of the United States for a long time, and that's not happening anymore. We can't let that happen. I have a great relationship with President Xi. He's a friend of mine, but we can't, you know, I've been telling him we can't let it happen. So we may make a deal at some point.
We may make a deal. Of course, Trump always says that, doesn't he, Nathan? But here's the problem for the Chinese. They see things a little bit differently. Trump is saying maybe they can get a deal. But it was interesting to hear administration officials briefing on this latest round of tariffs. They were asked, well, why can't President Xi and President Trump get together and resolve this? And the answer to that was President Trump has faith in his team. The problem is, do the Chinese have faith in that team anymore when they know that the US president is liable to pull the trigger on tariffs at any moment? And let's not forget, we're not at the end of this. Trump has suggested that if he doesn't get what he wants out of this, well, he'll pull the trigger on even more tariffs, some $267 billion worth of Chinese imports. At that point, we'd be talking about taxing China's entire exports to the United States. And according to many trade exports, there's simply no way that consumers and businesses would be spared from the impact of that, even when both administrations say they're trying to protect consumers and producers. Nathan.
Yeah, Christmas could be cancelled with these tariffs. There's a lot to discuss. Thanks so much, Owen.